Hey guys, welcome back to the ASE podcast. I'm your host, Darren Joe. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. This episode, I want to share with you a concept that has really helped me grow into being a solopreneur and helped me grow as a solopreneur. I found it to be very foundational, and I want to share this concept with you. It's called Outsight. And although it has a very simple definition, there's many layers to it that I want to unpack in this episode. Don't worry, it'll be a short one. Before I define Outsight, I want to first ask you a question. When you think about the big inflection points of your career, you think about the times where you really grew, perhaps as a leader, perhaps you moved from being an employee to a manager, maybe you went from being an employee to starting your own business. Those big realizations you had about yourself when you were put into a new role, or when you finally felt comfortable in that new role, how did those come about? If you're like me, and I'm someone who loves to read books, as you know, someone who loves to reflect, but if you're like me, those breakthroughs did not come from, for example, taking a personality test and realizing, okay, I am a ENFP, therefore I should do this sort of work. It didn't come from knowing my strengths. It didn't come from reading through past journals. That sort of insight, that sort of reflecting on the past, it has helped me improve, but it's never helped me transition or jump into a new role, right? What has helped me is experimentation. I never thought that people would call me an entrepreneur, a podcaster, a salsa dancer even. These are things I just experimented with, right? I loved podcasts and I thought, well, why not start my own in my little MBA space, which became the Touch MBA podcast. And now most people know me as a podcaster because of that show. Same thing with being an entrepreneur. I read a lot of books about entrepreneurship and small business, but none of those compare to me actually trying to start two companies. And while I don't completely, understand everything about entrepreneurship, I can say I learned a hell of a lot more from doing than from reading. This is the core idea of Outsight, that we need fresh and novel outside experiences, whether that's new people, new activities, or new ways of being, to truly step into whatever we want to be, whether that's being a better leader, being a better entrepreneur, becoming an entrepreneur, jumping into a new role, whatever it is. This is Outsight. Right? It comes from experimentation and outside events, not internal reflection on the past. And the business academic who coined this term, her name is Herminia Ibarra, and she wrote a book in 2015 called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. And her logic is very simple, and it's this. The way you think is a product of your past experience. Therefore, the only way to change how you think is to do different things, right? The way we see ourselves and the way we see the world is based on our experience. So how are we going to be able to change the way we see ourselves in the world? Through new experiences. And let me read a quote from her book. This will help explain Outsight. Our mindsets are very difficult to change because changing requires experience in what we are least apt to do. Without the benefit of an outside-in approach to change, our self-conceptions and therefore our habitual patterns of thought and action are rigidly fenced in by the past. No one pigeonholes us better than we ourselves do. The paradox of change is that the only way to alter the way we think is by doing the very things our habitual thinking keeps us from doing. I'm going to say that one more time. The paradox of change is that the only way to alter the way we think is by doing the very things our habitual thinking keeps us from doing. This Outsight principle holds that the only way to think like a leader is to first act, to plunge yourself into new projects and activities, to interact with very different kinds of people, and to experiment with unfamiliar ways of getting things done. Those fresh, challenging experiences and their outcomes will transform the habitual actions and thoughts that currently define your limits. In times of transition and uncertainty, thinking and introspection should follow action and experimentation, not vice versa. New experiences not only change how you think, your perspective on what is important and worth doing, but also change who you become. Yeah, I mean, that's Outsight in a nutshell. And I think what makes this deceptively difficult, this principle of Outsight, is what Herminia Ibarra, this author and academic, describes as the paradox of authenticity. Basically, it goes something like this. We know that to become better at something or to become something new, we have to do new things. But that's scary. That's outside our comfort zone. So we want to cling to what we're comfortable with. We want to cling what has gotten us results in the past. Right? We want to cling to our authentic selves. Becoming something new is scary enough. So I want to stay myself, right? But even though you might be authentic to your past self, that might not be effective for your new role, that way of being or of doing things or the people you know, right? And the same thing goes for if you went to the other extreme, if you became a chameleon, if you just, for example, decided, okay, I'm going to completely change everything about the way I act and what I do so I can become an entrepreneur. So you do this complete 180 switch of all your behaviors and your way of being because now you're an entrepreneur. And people will be like, oh, that's really strange, right? That seems really fake. And while it is necessary to assume and do new things, yeah, some people might find that off-putting. You might feel off-putted by that, right? You might feel fake and inauthentic, but those new behaviors might be necessary for you to be effective. So that is the paradox of authenticity. And it's kind of at the core of why Outsight is so difficult. So Herminia has studied leadership transitions in the workplace for many years. And I saw a video where she said on average, it takes people like 2 to 3 years to make a change. For example, they're just not satisfied with their job and they want to do something new. Well, that whole process often takes 2 to 3 years on average. Can you imagine? But it's true when I look back at my own experience as well. It's because we put so much value into our workplace identities. We put so much value, maybe as Americans, into what we do. Like the first question you get is like, well, what do you do? And I know in other countries, it's not always like that. People could care less, for example, about what you do in Colombia. But in the US, that's often the first question. And so we tie so much of our identity into what we do at work. So it's hard to let that go, right? Even if we know we should. And Herminia Ibarra calls this the fertile emptiness, the time of fertile emptiness, where it seems like nothing is happening, yet we're trying to change ourselves. We're trying to jump into new roles and do new things. But because of that deep psychological resistance to assuming a new identity, it takes us a long time. And as the world's changing so fast, but we're going to have to keep changing and keep evolving and keep growing as solopreneurs. And I truly believe this Outsight principle is so important. Okay, now, how can we go about doing this is the second thing I want to talk about. And it's important, Herminia mentions, to have a playful state of mind when we're experimenting and we're trying to get Outsight. She says, we need to be more playful with this because working on yourself sounds like drudgery. But playing with yourself, hey, that sounds a lot more fun. Let's try to play with ourselves more. Yeah, I said it. Play with ourselves more than work on ourselves. And I think this is really important. I've even gone so far to study how actors get into a new role. I took Natalie Portman's masterclass. I've read about how Joaquin Phoenix and Heath Ledger prepared for the role as Joker in the Batman movies. Obviously a very huge and complicated role. How did they do it? I mean, long story short, it's through imagination and experimentation, right? Again, they can't, through insight, from their own past experiences, discover this character. Rather, they have to experiment with different dress, a different mask, a different way of moving their bodies, a different way of speaking to others, a different way of speaking to themselves. What does their diary say? How does the Joker write to himself? What are his thoughts? What is in his journal? And I think we can learn a lot from actors here to get Outsight in the way they play and experiment and rehearse to come to a better understanding of the character. And that's essentially what we have to do to become better leaders and become better solopreneurs, is play with different ways of being by doing new things and by meeting new people. I mean, the best metaphor I have currently is dancing. So I dance salsa a lot. And a really fun exercise is when you're dancing to a song with your partner, it's like, okay, let's change the mood to this. Let's pretend we're performing for an audience. Okay, what does that look like and feel like? All right, now let's change the mood again. Let's pretend we're Cubans dancing salsa. Or let's pretend let's give this song sabor, like that flavor, right? And you experiment with different ways of dancing, and that leads to a lot of breakthroughs in terms of what you can actually do and how you can move. And that's what we need to do more of, right? Outsight. And this, of course, requires courage. But if we approach it as play instead of work, then it's more fun. That's the difference. And if you think of people in your life that are very self-serious, that take themselves very seriously, I realize that they're very rigid, those types of people, because they're going to stick to their lane. They're going to stick to what they know and what they're good at. But once they're outside of that, you can see them just tense up, and they're almost so brittle to try something new because they don't want to be seen as looking dumb or looking stupid. So those self-serious people who can't play, I think it's hard for them to grow. So we can all be a little less self-serious when we approach this. And so I'll read a quote again from Herminia Ibarra's book. As much as transitions require us to move way beyond our comfort zones, they can also trigger a strong countervailing impulse to protect our past identities. We easily retreat to old habits, especially those that have been rewarded in the past. Making significant changes, not just in what we do, but how we do it, requires a playful frame of mind. I recommend that people think of leadership development as, quote unquote, playing with rather than, quote unquote, working on themselves, which, let's face it, is not much fun. So when we adopt a playful attitude, we're more open to a diverse, even divergent set of possibilities. So I just really wanted to share this concept Outsight with you all. It has helped me, and honestly, right now I'm struggling a bit with feeling a bit stalled in what I'm doing with my business. And I am using this Outsight concept to try on new ways of running the business, of trying on new ideas. And I am actively trying to meet people outside my normal circle. People in your inner circle have usually already solidified their opinions of you, right? But if you meet up with your weaker ties, people in your past or new people, oftentimes that can lead to new insights about the way you do things. I'm going to continue to try to use this Outsight principle. It's core to the perfect day. What I've learned about trying to live my perfect day is that you have to act out what you think is your perfect day to realize, maybe some of those assumptions you had about your perfect day were wrong. So again, Outsight, especially in times of transition and growth. Outsight defeats insight or can accelerate your learning much faster than insight does, as much as I like to try to be insightful. All right, guys, I hope you found this episode helpful. You can find it at upstartist.tv/ASE, ASE/Outsight. And I'll link to all the books and writings I've done on this topic if you want to learn more. So go check that out. And I'll leave you with one last quote about Outsight. Aristotle observed that people become virtuous by acting virtuous. If you do good, you'll be good. His insight has been confirmed in a wealth of social psychology research, showing that people change their minds by first changing their behavior. Simply put, change happens from the outside in, not from the inside out. And one more really powerful quote about Outsight. And this is from Richard Tanner Pascal, who is a business academic. He wrote, "It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting." And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please press subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast app. It helps more people discover the show. Also, you can find all the show notes and links mentioned in this episode at upstartist.tv/ASE. That's ASE. Hope to see you there.